48,000 people coming out to see Detroit pitch. I said we couldn't have gave him a better show, you know? I don't know, everything's just new to me, so I just coming out as hard as I can come out at people. And then I have the D, those guys are doing 2/3 the work, and I'm only doing 1/3 by pitching, you know? They got me to runs and all that other stuff, and the people come out and draw it and get my adrenaline flowing. What can I ask? I couldn't ask for no much more.
And I was at Tiger Stadium, and the people went nuts, and it was like, God, I made an accomplishment. It was like a goal, which you figure I didn't start until May, and I was real hot. I just went, oh, wow, it's an all-star game. I mean, I used to only see the all-star game on TV.
What you are about to hear is one of the great tragic stories in American sport. Mark Fidrych was the pitcher who talked to baseballs on national television, smoothed the mound dirt with his bare hands between batters, and made an entire country fall back in love with baseball in the summer of 1976. He was pure, unscripted joy in a baseball uniform. But behind the magic, a clock was ticking. A broken medical system failed to diagnose the injury, quietly destroying his arm. An era of brutal workloads burned through him before he was 25. And then decades after the sport was behind him, a single terrible afternoon on a Massachusetts farm brought a tragic end that nobody saw coming. Stay with us, because we are going to walk you through exactly what really happened to the bird. I am Mason, and this is Baseball Icons. If you want more true sports stories like this, use the hype feature and give hype to this video so more people can see it. On the afternoon of April 13, 2009, a family friend named Joseph Amorello drove out to Mark Fidrych's farm in Northborough, Massachusetts. It was a quiet property, 107 acres of land that Fidrych had bought with his baseball earnings years earlier. Amorello arrived at around 2:30 in the afternoon. What he found stopped him cold. Mark Fidrych was lying beneath his 1987 Mack dump truck. He was not moving. Emergency services were called immediately, but there was nothing anyone could do. Mark Fidrych was dead. The Massachusetts State Police and the Worcester County District Attorney's Office launched a forensic investigation. Their conclusion was clear. This was an accident. Fidrych had been working underneath the truck with the engine running. The truck was equipped with a power takeoff shaft, which is a mechanical device that transfers rotary power from the engine to the hydraulic equipment that raises and lowers the dump bed. While he was underneath that truck, his clothing came into contact with the rotating universal joint of the auxiliary drive shaft. The fabric was caught instantly, and once that happens, there is no way out. The investigation did not take long to reach its conclusion. There was no sign of foul play, no evidence of a struggle. Nothing to suggest anything other than what the physical evidence clearly showed. A working man had gone underneath his truck to do a job, and the machinery had taken his life in the space of seconds. The forensic team documented everything carefully: the position of the body, the condition of the clothing, the state of the PTO shaft. Their findings left no room for doubt. Mark Fidrych had died in a workplace accident on his own property, doing work he had done hundreds of times before. A standard industrial PTO shaft spins at 540 revolutions per minute in its lower setting. That is 9 full rotations every single second. The average human reaction time is roughly half a second. In that half second, the shaft has already completed 4.5 full rotations. There is no time to pull away. There is no way to stop it. The protruding parts of the universal joint, the joints and pins and bolts that stick out as the shaft spins, snag loose clothing in an instant. Once the fabric catches, the rotational force pulls the person toward the shaft. The clothing compresses around the chest. Breathing stops. Death comes fast. Agricultural and industrial safety organizations have documented exactly this kind of accident across decades of case studies. A bootlace catching on a coupling pin, a jacket sleeve dragged into a spinning mechanism, loose clothing on an unguarded shaft. In one documented case, an operator stepped near an active PTO shaft and his bootlace caught on a protruding pin, throwing him backward and causing severe leg injuries. In another, a worker's jacket sleeve caught on a spinning shaft and dragged her arm into the mechanism before the machinery could be stopped. These are not freak occurrences. They are predictable, documented, and often fatal events that happen when people work near PTO equipment without fully understanding how unforgiving the physics are. That is how Mark Fidrych died. Alone on his farm, underneath a truck he had owned for years, doing the kind of blue-collar work he had chosen for himself, long after baseball was behind him. It was an ordinary afternoon that turned into a catastrophe in less than a second. But to understand the full weight of this story, you have to go back to the beginning. Because Mark Fidrych was not just a baseball player. He was a genuine American phenomenon. And the road that led him to that farm is one of the most haunting in all of sport. Mark Stephen Fidrych was born on August 14, 1954, in Worcester, Massachusetts. He grew up in the nearby town of Northborough, the same town where he would eventually buy his farm and live out the rest of his life. His early school years were difficult. He was held back 2 years in elementary school, which pushed his academic timeline behind his peers. By his senior year, to get around public school athletic eligibility age limits, he transferred to Worcester Academy, a local private preparatory school. He was not heavily recruited by college programs. He was a kid with a lot of energy and a moving fastball, and that was about as far as the scouting reports went. But that fastball was enough to catch the eye of Detroit Tigers scout Joe Cusick. The Tigers selected Fidrych in the 10th round of the 1974 amateur draft. He was 19 years old and had no idea that his life was about to take a turn towards something extraordinary. His first stop in professional baseball was the Appalachian League with the Single-A Bristol Tigers. It was there that he picked up the nickname that would follow him for the rest of his life. His coach, Jeff Hogan, noticed that Fidrych had a wiry frame, a wild mop of curly blonde hair, and a way of moving around the field that reminded him of a certain large yellow bird from a popular children's television program. The nickname stuck immediately. From that point on, he was the Bird. He moved through the minor league system at a steady pace, with stints in Lakeland, Montgomery, and Evansville. He worked on his delivery, which was high effort and intensely focused. He was not a polished prospect in the traditional sense. He did not have a vast arsenal of pitches. What he had was a live fastball, sharp movement, and a competitive intensity that was impossible to teach. But something about the way he competed, the way he attacked every single pitch as if the game depended on it, set him apart from the other young arms moving through the Detroit system. In 1976, he made the major league roster with the Detroit Tigers, initially as a bullpen option. His path to the starting rotation opened by accident on May 15, 1976, when scheduled starter Joe Coleman came down with the flu. Manager Ralph Hook needed someone to fill the spot on short notice against the Cleveland Indians. He turned to the 21-year-old kid who had barely been noticed a few months earlier. Fidrych went out and threw a complete game, 2-hit victory. He carried a no-hitter into the 7th inning. Just like that, he was in the rotation for good. Backup catcher Bruce Kim was designated as his personal catcher for all 29 of his starts that season. And over those 29 starts, Mark Fidrych did something that had almost never been done before and has certainly never been done since in quite the same way. He captured the heart of an entire country. What made Fidrych different was not just how he pitched, it was everything that happened between the pitches. He talked to the baseball out loud. Standing on the mound in front of tens of thousands of people, he would hold the ball up and give it instructions, telling it where to go and how to get there. He gestured toward home plate to map out the pitch's trajectory, like someone drawing a route on a map. He would drop to his knees between batters and smooth out the cleat marks on the mound with his bare hands, as if he were tending a garden he genuinely cared about. When a teammate made a great defensive play behind him, he would sprint across the diamond just to congratulate them personally. He was completely unfiltered and completely genuine. Some opponents were not amused. New York Yankees players like Thurman Munson and Willie Randolph found his behavior distracting at best and disrespectful at worst. But the public did not care what the Yankees thought. The public was completely in love. The moment that turned Fidrych into a national star came on June 28, 1976. ABC's Monday Night Baseball broadcast a game from Tiger Stadium between the Tigers and the Yankees. There were 47,855 fans packed into that stadium. Fidrych took the mound and threw a complete game 7-hitter to beat New York 5-1. After the final out, the crowd refused to leave. They chanted his name and called him back out for a curtain call, something almost unheard of for a pitcher in the 1970s. He came back out and waved. The television audience watching at home went wild. By the next morning, Mark Fidrych was a household name across the United States. Then on August 17, 1976, during Polish-American night at Tiger Stadium, he faced the California Angels before a capacity crowd of 51,822 fans. He won 3-2 in a complete game. The stadium was electric. Detroit had not seen anything like it in years. What followed was something that baseball had not seen in decades, pure, genuine bird mania. Opposing teams began asking the Tigers to adjust their pitching rotation so that Fidrych would pitch in their stadiums on the road. They wanted him specifically because he sold tickets everywhere he went. People who had not bought a baseball ticket in years were showing up just to watch this curly-haired kid from Massachusetts talk to a ball and smooth the dirt with his hands. His 18 home starts that season accounted for roughly half of the entire Detroit Tigers home attendance. For the whole year, think about that carefully. One pitcher, 18 games, half the season's total gate. That is not a stat. That is a cultural event. There was something else happening in 1976 that made the timing of Bird Mania even more significant. America was marking its 200th birthday that summer, the bicentennial, and the country was still working through the long shadow of Watergate and Vietnam. People were hungry for something simple and honest and fun. Fidrych gave them that. He did not have a polished media image. He did not have a marketing team. He just went out there and pitched his heart out and talked to the baseball and smoothed the mound with his bare hands, and somehow that was exactly what the country needed to see. And through all of it, Fidrych remained almost impossibly humble. He was earning the league minimum salary of $19,000 that year. After the season, the Tigers gave him a retroactive bonus that brought his 1976 earnings to $30,000. They then signed him to a 3-year contract starting at $50,000 for 1977. He took the deal gladly. Not because it was the maximum value he could have commanded, but because he wanted to secure the 4 years of Major League service time he needed to qualify for the MLB pension. By the end of the 1976 season, his numbers were historic. He threw 250 in a third innings. He completed 24 games out of 29 starts. His earned run average was 2.34, leading the American League. His wins above replacement value was 9.6, placing that rookie campaign among the most valuable in baseball history. He won the American League Rookie of the Year award. He finished second in the Cy Young voting. He was the talk of the entire sport. Beyond the numbers, there was something about that 1976 season that transcended individual statistics. Fidrych did not just pitch well, he changed the atmosphere in every stadium he entered. He made people who had never cared about baseball care about it. He made cynical sports writers feel like children again. He did it not through calculated charisma or media training, but through the absolute authenticity of everything he did on the mound. You cannot purchase that quality. You cannot manufacture it. You can only be born with it and then spend your whole career living inside it, which is exactly what Mark Fidrych did throughout every single one of his 29 starts that year. But behind all of that success, behind all of that joy, the clock was already ticking, and nobody knew it yet. The story of what happened to Mark Fidrych's arm is not a story about bad luck. It is a story about a system that ground up a young pitcher without fully understanding the damage it was doing, coupled with a medical world that simply lacked the tools to see what was actually happening inside his body. And it begins not with his shoulder, but with his knee. During spring training in 1977, Fidrych tore the cartilage in his left knee. It happened while he was shagging fly balls in the outfield, a completely routine activity. The timing could not have been worse. Fidrych was coming off his legendary rookie season and was set to be the face of the Tigers for years to come. The pressure to get him back on the mound was enormous, both from the front office and from Fidrych himself, who wanted desperately to prove that 1976 was not a fluke. He underwent surgery and was back on the active roster by May 27, 1977. That was 7 weeks after the injury. 7 weeks to recover from knee cartilage surgery and return to the demands of Major League starting pitching. In today's game, that timeline would be considered dangerously fast. In 1977, it was considered acceptable. And here is where the real damage began. The pitching motion is a chain reaction that runs through the entire body. It starts with the legs pushing off the mound, flows through the hips and the core, and finishes with the arm releasing the ball. The front leg is critical in that chain. It is the landing leg. It absorbs the force of the stride and provides a stable platform for the rest of the delivery. For Fidrych, that landing leg was his left leg, the same leg with the knee that had just been operated on and was not fully healed. Because the knee could not properly absorb the landing forces the way a healthy joint would, Fidrych unconsciously began to compensate. He shifted the physical stress of his delivery. Instead of the force flowing efficiently through his legs and core, more of it was being loaded onto his shoulder with every single pitch. He did not do this deliberately. Nobody compensates deliberately. The body is extraordinarily good at finding workarounds, at keeping performance going even when something is damaged. But those workarounds always have a cost. The body robs one part to protect another. And in this case, the part being damaged was the rotator cuff in Fidrych's throwing shoulder, a complex assembly of muscles and tendons that was being asked to absorb forces it was never designed to handle on its own. The damage was cumulative. It did not happen in one dramatic moment. It built up pitch by pitch, start by start, across months of heavy use on a compromised delivery. Manager Ralph Hook kept sending Fidrych out to pitch. The workload did not decrease. Between 1976 and 1978, Fidrych completed 77% of his starts. He regularly threw more than 120 pitches per game based on the number of batters he faced. There is a documented instance of him throwing an estimated 165 pitches in a single outing. In the modern era, most teams set strict pitch count limits, often around 100 pitches, and a starter going past 120 is rare enough to make headlines. Fidrych was doing it routinely on a shoulder that was quietly being destroyed pitch by pitch. The numbers tell part of the story, but the physical reality is even more striking when you consider what was actually happening inside his body. A 21-year-old shoulder is still developing. The tendons and muscles are still adapting to the repeated stress of the throwing motion. Even without a knee injury, altering the mechanics, throwing 250 innings of high-effort pitching at that age puts enormous strain on developing tissue. Add in the compensatory overload from the knee injury, and you have a shoulder being asked to do far more than it was built to handle. Every additional pitch was adding to a total that would eventually reach a breaking point. Hook faced criticism later for failing to protect his young star. The criticism is fair. But it is also true that in the 1970s, complete games were the expectation for a healthy-appearing, dominating pitcher. The entire framework for thinking about young arm protection simply did not exist yet. What happened to Fidrych helped build that framework for the pitchers who came after him. The moment everything came apart happened on July 4th, 1977, during a game against the Baltimore Orioles. Fidrych had built a 6-2 record heading into that game. He was throwing well. Then, in the 6th inning, Baltimore's Eddie Murray hit a home run off him. It was not the home run that mattered. What happened immediately after defined the rest of his career? He felt his arm go completely dead. Not tired, not sore. Dead. All the feeling and all the power vanished from his throwing arm at the same moment. He was removed from the game, and he would never truly recover. When Fidrych began experiencing persistent shoulder pain after that July 4 game, he was examined by multiple orthopedic specialists. These were the top doctors available to a Major League Baseball team. They looked at his shoulder carefully and thoroughly, and they found nothing. No structural defects, no visible damage, a clean bill of health on paper. The reason they found nothing is heartbreaking in its simplicity. Magnetic resonance imaging, the MRI machine that today can show a detailed picture of every ligament and tendon in the human body, was not yet in clinical use. Diagnostic arthroscopy, the procedure that allows a surgeon to insert a tiny camera into a joint and see what is happening inside, was still experimental and far from standard practice. The medical tools that would have revealed exactly what was wrong with Fidrych's shoulder simply did not exist in a usable form at that point in time. So his condition was labeled dead arm, or chronic shoulder tightness, and the prescription was to throw through the discomfort. Think about what that means in a very practical sense. Fidrych would show up for an examination. The doctor would physically test the range of motion in his shoulder. They would press on different points and ask him to describe the pain. They would take x-rays, which show bone but cannot show soft tissue damage like torn tendons or muscles. And the results would come back negative. No bone damage, no obvious structural problem. In the absence of imaging technology that could actually show the torn tissue, the best available conclusion was that there was no serious structural issue. The pain must be muscular tightness or inflammation. The prescription was rest and a gradual return to throwing, and then when the throwing resumed and the pain came back, the cycle would start again. There was no malice involved. There was a catastrophic gap between what was actually happening inside his shoulder and what the available technology could detect. That gap cost him his career. The comeback attempts that followed over the next several years are painful to read about. In 1978, he returned to the rotation and immediately looked like his old self, throwing 2 complete game victories early in the season. For a brief moment, it seemed like things might turn around. Then his 3rd start came. His arm failed again. Back to the disabled list. He spent part of that 1978 recovery period working as a guest color analyst on ABC's Monday Night Baseball, sitting alongside Al Michaels in the broadcast booth. It did not go well. Fidrych was criticized for his lack of preparation during the broadcasts. He was a baseball player, not a television personality, and it showed. But there was something deeply sad about watching the most electrifying pitcher in baseball reduced to commenting on games he could not play in. The years from 1979 to 1980 brought diminishing returns. He struggled in limited major league starts. In 1979, he posted an earned run average of over 10. In 1980, it came down to 568, still far from the 234 of his rookie year. There is something particularly cruel about his final major league game on October 1st, 1980. He won it. He threw a complete game against the Toronto Blue Jays. At 26 years old, with 2 undiagnosed rotator cuff tears eating away at his shoulder, Mark Fidrych stood on a major league mound and finished what he started. It was the last time he would ever pitch in the big leagues. He did not know that at the time. Nobody did. He was still hoping that the next season would be the one where everything came together again, where the arm would finally feel right, where the bird would fly one more time. The Tigers released him at the end of the 1981 season. He signed a minor league contract with the Boston Red Sox, hoping to restart his career with their AAA affiliate, the Pawtucket Red Sox. It was a long way down from selling out Tiger Stadium, but Fidrych was not the kind of person who complained. The Pawtucket years had a particular sadness to them that is easy to miss if you just look at the raw numbers. Here was a man pitching through constant pain in a minor league park years after he had been a national phenomenon. The fans in Pawtucket were kind to him. They appreciated having him there, but it was a long way from the Monday Night Baseball curtain calls and the packed houses at Tiger Stadium. He never complained. He kept showing up and trying to get batters out with a shoulder that the doctors still had not correctly diagnosed. In 1982, he posted a 6-8 record. In 1983, his earned run average at AAA reached nearly 10. His final professional appearance came in a Pawtucket game against a young pitcher named Dave Righetti, who would go on to become a New York Yankees star. That game became a small piece of local baseball folklore. Mark Fidrych retired on June 29, 1983. He was 28 years old. He had spent 6 years trying to come back from an injury that nobody had properly diagnosed. Then, in 1985, friends recommended that Fidrych go and see a physician named Dr. James Andrews, who was pioneering new approaches to joint surgery using arthroscopic techniques he had been developing. Andrews examined Fidrych's shoulder. What he found was damning. There were 2 severe tears in Fidrych's rotator cuff. Not one, 2. Both had been there, undetected and untreated, for years, while specialists told him they could find nothing wrong. Andrews performed surgery. When Fidrych woke up from the procedure, he was pain-free for the first time in 8 years. 8 years of throwing, grinding, and being told to push through the discomfort, all while carrying 2 severe rotator cuff tears that no one had been able to see. But there was no saving his career. The long delay between the injury and the diagnosis had allowed irreversible muscle atrophy to set in. The tissue around the tears had scarred over. The shoulder could be made comfortable, but it could not be restored. The window for a return to professional baseball had closed years ago. If Fidrych had torn his rotator cuff today, an MRI would have identified it within days. He would have had surgery. He would have gone through a structured rehabilitation program. There is every reason to believe he would have come back and pitched at or near his peak level for many more years. Instead, the medical tools that could have saved his career simply did not exist in a usable form at the time he needed them. His case helped push the adoption of MRI technology and arthroscopic surgery into mainstream sports medicine. The lessons from what happened to him were written into how teams now manage and protect young pitchers. But those lessons came far too late for Mark Fidrych himself. After the surgery in 1985, Fidrych returned to Northborough and built a new life with the same uncomplaining good nature he had shown on every mound he ever stood on. He settled back with a quiet contentment that most observers found remarkable. Here was a man who had been on the cover of magazines, who had drawn curtain calls from 50,000 fans, who had been the most talked about athlete in America for an entire summer. And now he was driving a dump truck and hauling gravel for road construction. He was clearing trees on his farm property. He was helping out at a local diner. And by every account from everyone who knew him during those years, he was genuinely happy. He did not give interviews about what he had lost. He did not speak bitterly in public about the long years of pain or the brilliant career that the diagnostic failure had stolen from him. He had made peace with all of it and simply moved forward. That tells you something important about who Mark Fidrych actually was. The fame had never been the point for him. The point had always been the competition itself, and when that was taken away, he found new things to care about, and he cared about them fully. He bought the 107-acre farm with his baseball earnings and went to work with his hands. He cleared land, he chopped wood, he laid sewer pipe. He worked as a traveling liquor salesman for a time. Eventually, he purchased a 10-wheel Mack dump truck and set himself up as an independent contractor, hauling gravel and asphalt for local road construction projects in the Worcester area. In 1986, he married Ann Pantasis, whom he had met while she was working at Chet's Diner, a historic diner in Northborough that had been hand-built in 1931 by the Worcester Lunch Car Company. The Pantasis family had been running the diner since 1964, and it was later operated by Fidrych's daughter, Jessica. Chet's Diner became an anchor point for the family and a gathering place where community life intersected naturally. Fidrych was a regular presence there, helping out, talking to customers, being the same warm and open person he had always been. He remained a beloved figure in the broader community. He volunteered his time with the Special Olympics. He worked with the Jimmy Fund, the Boston-based charity dedicated to raising money for cancer research and treatment for children. He showed up at local events, not as a celebrity seeking attention, but as a neighbor who genuinely wanted to be there. Shortly before his death, he played himself in a 2009 independent film called Dear Mr. Fidrych, which captured the enduring impact he had on baseball fans across the country. People who had watched him talk to baseballs in 1976 had never forgotten it. He was still the bird. The years on his face could not change what he meant to people. He was, by every measure, a content man. He had found what he needed after baseball. A place to live, work that used his body, a family to love, a community that cared about him. The injuries and the shortened career had not made him bitter, which makes what happened on April 13, 2009 all the more devastating. Let us go back to that afternoon one more time. Fidrych was working on his 1987 Mack dump truck. He had owned that truck for years. It was central to his contracting work. He was under the chassis with the engine running. The PTO drive shaft was engaged. The truck had been sold originally as a cab and chassis unit without a complete body. After Fidrych purchased it in 1987, downstream contractors had converted it into a dump truck by adding the hydraulic lift system, the auxiliary drive shafts, and the universal joints that connect everything together. Those additions were made by aftermarket specialists, not by the original manufacturer. When he went underneath the truck that day, the auxiliary drive shaft and its universal joints were spinning. Those universal joints are the mechanical connectors that allow a rotating shaft to change angle. They are irregularly shaped. They have protruding parts. They are exactly the kind of surface that catches loose fabric without warning. His clothing made contact with the rotating universal joint. The fabric was caught instantly. The rotational force immediately began pulling his body toward the shaft. The clothing compressed around his chest. His breathing was restricted. It was over before anyone could know it had started. He was found by Joseph Amorello at around 2:30 that afternoon. The investigation concluded quickly. Accidental asphyxiation resulting from entanglement in a rotating PTO shaft, a workplace accident of the kind that claims lives in agriculture and construction every single year. Mark Fidrych was 54 years old. In July 2012, his widow Ann Fantasies filed a wrongful death and products liability lawsuit in Worcester Superior Court against Mack Trucks, Dana Corp., which had acquired the assets of PTO manufacturer Parker Hannifin Corp. And local dealerships Morse Mack Sales and Ballard Mack Sales. The plaintiff's argument was that the truck had been sold in a dangerous and defective condition because the auxiliary drive shaft and universal joints were left exposed without protective safety guards, and that the manufacturers had failed to provide adequate warnings about fatal PTO entanglement risk. The defense built its case around three main pillars. First, downstream modification. Fidrych had purchased an incomplete cabin chassis unit in 1987. The hazardous components had been added by aftermarket contractors, not by the original manufacturers. Under products liability law, a manufacturer cannot be held responsible for hazards created by downstream modifications. Second, adequate warnings. The Parker Hannifin PTO system had included a warning decal explicitly stating not to go underneath vehicle with the engine running and not to work near a rotating drive shaft. Mack Trucks had also updated its owner's manuals over the years to warn of the risk of death from PTO entanglement. Third, comparative negligence. Under Massachusetts law, a plaintiff cannot recover damages if their own negligence is found to be greater than 50% responsible for the harm. Working underneath a running vehicle with the PTO engaged was argued to constitute primary negligence on Fidrych's part. The Superior Court granted summary judgment for the defendants, and Pantazis appealed. On November 27, 2017, a three-judge panel of the Massachusetts Appeals Court unanimously affirmed the dismissal. Judge James Milkey ruled that the component parts manufactured by the defendants contained no design defects. Because the hazards arose from aftermarket modifications and downstream assembly decisions, the original manufacturers had no duty to warn of those specific dangers. The family received nothing. The legal road ended there. The ruling can be understood within its legal framework and still leave a heavy feeling. What the outcome clarifies, more than anything, is how much responsibility falls on individuals when working alone around industrial machinery. The warnings existed in writing. The physics were absolute. The only reliable protection in that situation is operational practice. Do not go underneath the vehicle with the engine running. Do not engage the PTO if you are working near the shaft. That afternoon, for whatever reason, the engine was running and the shaft was spinning. The workers who lose their lives to PTO entanglement every year are not usually famous. They do not have their stories told on national news or argued about in appellate courts. They are farmers and contractors and equipment operators who made a single mistake near a spinning shaft and paid the ultimate price for it. Mark Fidrych's death brought unusual attention to this hazard simply because of who he was. His name made the accident newsworthy in a way that most similar accidents are not. If anything positive came from the tragedy, it is the amplification of safety awareness around this type of machinery for people who work with it every day. What the case also illustrates is the specific vulnerability of people who work alone with industrial equipment. Mark Fidrych was by himself on that farm when the accident occurred. There was no coworker who could have reached the ignition in time. There was no safety partner to shut the machine down the moment something went wrong. On large construction sites and in agricultural settings, workers are frequently alone with equipment that is indifferent to human error. The physics of a PTO shaft do not care whether the person nearby is a former Rookie of the Year or a first-day apprentice. The machine responds the same way to everyone. And that is precisely why the warnings that came with the equipment existed. They were not there as legal formalities. They were there because the consequences of ignoring them are final. There is a broader story running through all of this. The baseball system of the 1970s failed Fidrych by treating young pitchers as engines to be run at full throttle without adequate protection. There were no pitch count limits. There was no structured conversation about workload management for 21-year-olds. His case, along with others from that era, contributed directly to the development of modern pitcher usage protocols. The lessons were learned and written into the way teams now manage young arms. But those lessons came after the damage was done to him. The medical system failed him by lacking the tools to see what was happening inside his shoulder. The doctors who examined him were not negligent. They used what was available to them. But the absence of MRI and accessible arthroscopy meant that a clearly injured pitcher spent 8 years being told he was fine. That gap accelerated the push toward advanced imaging in professional sports medicine. Today, an injury like his would be caught and treated within weeks. That progress is partly built on what happened to Mark Fidrych. But let us not end on the machinery or the courts or the medical failures. Let us end on the man himself. Mark Fidrych brought something to baseball that cannot be measured in any statistic. He brought pure and unfiltered joy. In the summer of 1976, when America was looking for something to feel good about, a skinny kid from Northborough walked out to the mound and started talking to a baseball. He did it with complete sincerity. He was not creating a persona. He was not building a brand. He was just being himself, and it turned out that being himself was exactly what 50,000 people in the stands and millions more at home had been waiting to see. He played the game with a love that you cannot fake. The sprinting to congratulate fielders, the smoothing of the mound with bare hands, the conversations with the ball. These were not gimmicks. They were the honest expressions of a person who was completely present in every single moment he spent on a baseball field. And when baseball was taken from him, not by choice, but by injuries and a medical era that could not keep up with the damage being done, he did not fold. He went home, bought a farm, drove a dump truck, helped run a diner, and showed up for his community year after year. Baseball still feels his absence. The game produced someone so original, so completely himself, that there is still a Fidrych-shaped space in the sport that nothing else has ever quite filled. He showed players and fans alike what it looks like when someone loves what they do so completely that there is no gap between the person and the performance. It is all just one thing. It is all just him. That is the true legacy of Mark Fidrych. Not just the numbers from 1976, extraordinary as they are. Not just the cultural moment of Bird Mania, but the consistency of character across an entire life. The man who was joyful on the mound was the same man who volunteered for the Special Olympics and worked with sick children through the Jimmy Fund. The man who talked to baseballs was the same man who married Ann Pantazis and raised a family and helped keep a diner going that had been in Northborough since 1931. He was, at every stage of his life, genuinely himself. Baseball has never seen quite another one like him, and it probably never will. If this story moved you, please like this video and subscribe to Baseball Icons for more stories like this one. Let us know in the comments what you remember about the Bird, or what part of his story hit you hardest. We read every comment.